Good evening, my fellow Americans. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
So when I really think about the speech from Dwight David Eisenhower, his farewell speech about the military-industrial complex, it brings up a lot of stuff for me. I was recruited to go off-planet in 2006, and it seems to be related to the alternative 3 scenario that relates to creating colonies off-planet, and the Mars colony was the planet that was being discussed during that time. And so when we hear about a warning like that, but we don't hear about the actual alternatives or agendas or ET government treaties and some of the things that were taking place, what was he really trying to say? There's so many layers to the military-industrial complex that we're starting to discover now. And I've been definitely researching and digging real deep in order to understand really what he meant. And as many have uncovered and been a whistleblower for, and just my own experience in that Mars recruitment, we discover a secret space program, this multi-level shadow government with compartmentalism, things that happened after the Second World War, and the infiltration coming in from Project Paperclip to the American government, MK Ultra having so many branches. So it's like, okay, here's a warning about the misplaced power that exists and will persist if we as an American people don't start to become empowered, which is basically what I got from it. I could feel a lot of pride in a lot of my family members about that speech. But I would say that I'm a family member that has, I think, recognized some layers that were not brought to my attention growing up, that I've been able to sort of share with them. And again, there's compartmentalism. The NSA signed something in 1947 that made it legal, like a law, that you couldn't disclose this sort of stuff without massive ramifications. And here we are in this particular window, without oaths being signed by many of us, with more freedom of speech and more of an ability to bring light to all of this. And that's why the speech is really relevant, because it rings true to today. Those warnings are something that we're beginning to finally uncover.
Actually started back in 1955 with the Eisenhower administration that was forced into a treaty, somewhat of a surrender, with a Nazi faction that had been operating. One of the witnesses that was Brigadier General Stephen Lufkin, who was on Eisenhower's staff, who was aware that he lost control to the corporations and that it would not be in the best of hands. And so once this treaty was signed, Nelson Rockefeller restructured the whole CIA MJ-12 operations. So now our legal government is no longer in the loop. They also replaced the complete MJ-12 group that was originally set up by President Truman with Allen Dulles as MJ-1, or head of the MJ-12 operations of all people, who was highly instrumental in the Nazi infiltration. What happened was, when this happened, all of the reverse engineering operations that were Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio were moved to Area 51 and S4, where Eisenhower realized that he had lost control when he attempted to look into it. He was denied access. Here, a five-star general was really pissed, so he threatened to invade Area 51 with the First Army out of Colorado. And until they allowed 2 agents to give a report of what's going on over there. And what they found was that several craft were being reverse engineered that were extraterrestrial and German origin.
One of the ways that the Nazis obtained their advanced technology before World War II was through the use of a channeler called Maria Orsic. Maria Orsic was channeling telepathic messages from extraterrestrials that were offering her plans and schematics to actually create anti-gravity craft. Maria Orsic channeled this information for the occult Vril Society in Germany. This information was later used by these German secret societies to build out many of their crafts. Because they were focused more on the qualitative superiority rather than the quantitative, they were more focused on having more advanced technology rather than more tanks and boots on the ground. They were losing the ground war in Europe, but they were obtaining the more advanced technology. And to save that technology, they took it down to Antarctica pre and during World War II.
In the late 1930s, the Nazis had an expeditionary group go down to Antarctica, and they found some very interesting things. They found a region under the ice that was created by geothermal heat from volcanoes, and there would be 3 miles of ice, and a few thousand feet above ground level would have been melted by the geothermal heat, and the rest of the ice acts as an insulator, causing it sort of like an igloo effect, and the dome would grow from the heat, the geothermal heat, and it would melt and run under the ice, and that was some of what was lubricating the ice and causing it to move. But underneath these areas, they were finding perfect areas to build submarine bases. So not only did the Nazis build out submarine bases, as they developed more and more of their space program, they developed out a massive spaceport. After these spaceports were developed, and the Nazis had handed it over to basically the Americans began to develop more and more research and development bases in Antarctica. In the late 1950s, a treaty was signed that stated that Antarctica was only to be used for peaceful research. Well, we were basically arriving and digging giant holes under the ice in various areas and building out these giant complexes, much like I think it was called Project Iceworm back in the 1960s, where like in Greenland, the United States Army Corps of Engineers was building out an ICBM base hidden under the ice, and it was very sophisticated. I'm told that they were very similar in when they were built and how they were built to the buildings that were built in this program. Companies that were given access to these R&D bases began to develop NBC testing, they called it, nuclear, biological, chemical testing, which in the programs usually translates into them working with clones, working with different chemical compounds to affect how people develop psychologically or physiologically. So a lot of very, very dark scientific programs began to be developed down in Antarctica, and indeed are going on to this very day. One of the biggest things that the cabal does not want us to know about are the existence of these R&D bases and all of the horrible crimes against humanity that are occurring on these R&D bases.